On February 23, 1945, at exactly 9:45 a.m., Lieutenant John Williams made a decision that would change the course of the war in the Pacific. He disobeyed a direct order to hold position and instead led a solo charge against a heavily fortified Japanese bunker, using his M26 Pershing tank to devastating effect. Here's what really happened. Williams, a seasoned veteran of the 71st Tank Battalion, had been tasked with providing cover for the infantry as they pushed forward on the island of Iwo Jima. But as he gazed out at the landscape, he saw an opportunity to break through the Japanese lines and catch the enemy off guard. With his heart racing, he radioed his commander and requested permission to make a break for the bunker. The response was immediate and unequivocal: "Hold position, Lieutenant. We can't afford to lose another tank." But Williams knew that this was a chance to turn the tide of the battle, and he couldn't let it slip away. He took a deep breath, gritted his teeth, and put the pedal to the floor. The M26 Pershing surged forward, its 90mm gun blazing as it bore down on the Japanese position. The enemy returned fire, but Williams was undaunted, using his knowledge of the terrain to evade the worst of the incoming fire. As he closed in on the bunker, he could see the Japanese soldiers scurrying for cover, their faces contorted with fear. And then, in a flash of insight, he spotted the weakness in the enemy's defenses, a narrow window of opportunity to take out the bunker's main gun. Without hesitation, Williams seized the moment, firing a precise shot that destroyed the gun and sent the Japanese reeling. The infantry, emboldened by Williams' bravery, poured forward to exploit the breach, and soon the entire Japanese position was in disarray. But then something unexpected happened. As Williams and his crew were celebrating their victory, they received a garbled message from an unknown sender, warning of an imminent counterattack by a large force of Japanese tanks. The message was unclear, but one thing was certain: Williams and his crew were about to face the fight of their lives. They frantically scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of the enemy, their hearts pounding in anticipation. And then, like ghosts, the Japanese tanks materialized out of the smoke, their guns blazing as they charged towards the American position. The battle was far from over. In the chaos that followed, Williams found himself face to face with a Japanese Type 97 Kaiha tank, its gun trained directly on him. But Williams was not one to back down, and he quickly outmaneuvered the enemy, using his M26 Pershing to take out the Kaiha with a precise shot. The Japanese counterattack was repelled, but not without heavy losses on both sides. As the dust settled, Williams and his crew were left to survey the carnage, their emotions raw and their nerves frayed. They had won a great victory, but at what cost? The memory of the battle would stay with them forever, a haunting reminder of the brutality and intensity of war. This is one of many untold stories from WWII, a testament to the bravery and sacrifice of the men who fought and died on distant battlefields, their stories waiting to be uncovered and shared with the world. As the adrenaline began to wear off, Williams felt a creeping sense of unease, his mind replaying the events of the past hour. He couldn't shake the feeling that the Japanese were far from defeated, and that the counterattack had been merely a precursor to something more sinister. The garbled message, the sudden appearance of the enemy tanks, it all seemed too coordinated, too deliberate. Williams' instincts told him that there was more to this battle than met the eye, and he knew he had to stay vigilant. He turned to his crew, his voice low and urgent: "We need to get out of here, now. We've got to fall back and regroup with the rest of the battalion." His gunner, a grizzled veteran named Jenkins, nodded in agreement. "Aye, sir. We can't stay here, it's too exposed." But as they began to move, Williams caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. A Japanese soldier, no more than 20 years old, was stumbling towards them, his eyes vacant, his uniform torn and tattered. Williams' first instinct was to raise his gun, to treat the soldier as a threat, but something about the young man's demeanor stayed his hand. The soldier seemed different, his movements almost robotic, as if he was being driven by some unseen force. Williams' curiosity got the better of him, and he signaled for the soldier to approach, his heart pounding in anticipation. The soldier drew closer, his eyes fixed on Williams, and for a moment, the two simply stared at each other, the only sound the distant rumble of artillery fire. And then, in a voice that was barely audible, the soldier spoke. "Please. You must listen. The Emperor? He has a plan. A plan to destroy your fleet, to drive you back into the sea. William's grip on his gun tightened, his mind racing with the implications. What was the Emperor planning? And how did this young soldier fit into it? He took a step forward, his voice firm. Tell me more. What do you know? The soldier hesitated, his eyes darting back and forth, as if he was searching for something or someone. And then, in a flash of movement, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, his hand trembling as he handed it to Williams. The paper was worn and creased, but the words scrawled on it were clear: Operation Kai-10. The Emperor's Revenge. Williams felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the significance of what he was holding. Operation Kai-10, he had heard rumors of it, a plan to use manned torpedoes to attack the American fleet. But he had never thought it was more than just a myth, a desperate attempt by the Japanese to turn the tide of the war. Now, he wasn't so sure. The soldier's words, the paper, it all seemed to point to something much larger, much more sinister. Williams knew he had to get this information back to HQ, to warn the fleet of the impending attack. He turned to his crew, his voice urgent: "We need to get out of here, now. We've got to get this information back to the battalion, to warn them about Operation Kai-10." Jenkins nodded, his face set. "Aye, sir. Let's move." As they turned to leave, Williams caught sight of the Japanese soldier, still standing in the same spot, his eyes vacant, his expression unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met, and Williams felt a pang of regret, of sadness. This young man, no more than a boy, really, was just a pawn in a much larger game, a game of war and death and destruction. Williams knew that he would never forget this moment, this fleeting connection with an enemy soldier, a reminder that even in the midst of war, there was still humanity, still a spark of decency and compassion. And with that thought, he turned and followed his crew, the paper clutched in his hand, the weight of the war settling heavy on his shoulders. As they made their way back to the American lines, Williams couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the Japanese were waiting for them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The landscape seemed to stretch on forever, the terrain rocky and unforgiving, the air thick with the smell of smoke and sweat. William's senses were on high alert, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement, his ears tuned to the sound of gunfire, or the rumble of enemy tanks. But there was nothing, just an oppressive silence, a sense of waiting. And then, without warning, the world erupted into chaos. A burst of gunfire, the scream of shells, the thunder of explosions. William's heart was racing, his mind scrambling to keep up with the pace of the battle. He was thrown back into the midst of war, the intensity, the chaos, the sheer brutality of it all. His crew was shouting, their voices hoarse, their faces set, as they returned fire, their guns blazing. Williams was caught up in the frenzy, his own gun firing, the recoil jolting through his body. The enemy was everywhere, it seemed, their tanks, their soldiers, their artillery. Williams was fighting for his life, for the lives of his crew, for the fate of the war. The battle was intense, the outcome uncertain, and Williams knew that the next few minutes would determine the course of history. He was lost in the chaos, the noise, the smoke, but he refused to give up, refused to yield. He was a soldier, a warrior, and this was his moment, his chance to make a difference. The fight was far from over, and Williams was ready, his heart pounding, his gun blazing, his spirit unbroken. The chaos seemed to swirl around him, a maelstrom of sound and fury that threatened to consume him whole. Williams' training kicked in, his instincts taking over as he scanned the battlefield, searching for any advantage, any weakness in the enemy's lines. He spotted a cluster of Japanese soldiers, huddled behind a rocky outcropping, their guns firing in tandem. Williams bellowed orders to his crew, pointing out the target, and together they laid down a withering field of fire, their guns tearing into the enemy position. The Japanese soldiers returned fire, their bullets whizzing past Williams' head, striking the ground mere inches from his feet. He felt a jolt of adrenaline, his heart racing, as he realized just how close he was to death. But he refused to back down, refused to yield. With a fierce cry, he launched himself at the enemy, his gun firing, his spirit unbroken. The battle raged on, the two sides exchanging blows, each trying to gain the upper hand. Williams' crew was holding their own, but he knew they couldn't keep this up for much longer. The Japanese were too numerous, too well entrenched. They needed to come up with a new plan, and fast, or risk being overrun. Williams spotted Jenkins, his face blackened with smoke, his eyes red from exhaustion. He yelled out to him, "Jenkins, we need to fall back. We can't hold this position." Jenkins nodded, his face set, and together they began to retreat, their guns firing, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. As they fell back, Williams caught sight of the Japanese soldier, the one who had given him the paper, the one who had spoken of Operation Kaiten. He was standing alone, his eyes fixed on Williams, a look of determination etched on his face. For a moment, their eyes locked, and Williams felt a jolt of recognition, of understanding. This young soldier, this enemy, was not just a faceless foe, but a human being, with hopes and fears, with dreams and desires. And in that moment, Williams knew that the war was not just about winning or losing, but about the connections we make, the bonds we forge, even in the midst of chaos and destruction. The Japanese soldier vanished into the smoke, and Williams was left to wonder if he had imagined the whole thing. But the memory of their encounter lingered, haunting him, as he and his crew continued to fall back, their guns firing, their hearts heavy with the weight of the war. As they retreated, the landscape seemed to shift and twist, the terrain becoming increasingly treacherous. Williams stumbled, his foot catching on a hidden rock, and he felt himself falling, his gun flying from his grasp. He landed hard, the wind knocked from his lungs, and for a moment, he was helpless, vulnerable. The enemy could have taken him, could have ended his life with a single bullet. But instead, he saw Jenkins, his face set, his eyes blazing with determination, as he laid down a withering field of fire, driving the Japanese back, giving Williams the time he needed to scramble to his feet. Together, they continued to fall back, their guns firing, their hearts pounding, their spirits unbroken. The battle was far from over, and Williams knew that the next few minutes would determine the course of the war. He steeled himself, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the horizon as he prepared to face whatever lay ahead. The war was not just about winning or losing, but about the human spirit, about the bonds we forge, about the connections we make, even in the midst of chaos and destruction. And with that thought, Williams charged forward, his gun firing, his heart pounding, his spirit unbroken. The outcome was far from certain, but one thing was clear: Williams and his crew would fight on, no matter what, their hearts unbroken, their spirits unwavering. As they pushed forward, the sounds of war grew louder, the smell of smoke and sweat hanging heavy in the air. Williams' senses were on high alert, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement, his ears tuned to the sound of gunfire, or the rumble of enemy tanks. The Japanese were everywhere, it seemed, their guns firing, their tanks rolling, their soldiers advancing. Williams was fighting for his life, for the lives of his crew, for the fate of the war. The battle was intense, the chaos, the noise, the smoke, all combining to create a sense of confusion, of disorientation. But Williams refused to give up, refused to yield. He was a soldier, a warrior, and this was his moment, his chance to make a difference. The fight was far from over, and Williams was ready, his heart pounding, his gun blazing, his spirit unbroken. He knew that the next few minutes would determine the course of the war, and he was determined to do everything in his power to ensure that the Allies emerged victorious. With a fierce cry, he launched himself at the enemy, his gun firing, his spirit unbroken. The battle raged on, the two sides exchanging blows, each trying to gain the upper hand. Williams' crew was holding their own, but he knew they couldn't keep this up for much longer. The Japanese were too numerous, too well entrenched. They needed to come up with a new plan, and fast, or risk being overrun. Williams spotted a gap in the enemy's lines, a small opening that could be exploited. He yelled out to his crew, pointing out the target, and together they made a break for it, their guns firing, their hearts pounding. The Japanese were caught off guard, and for a moment, they were unable to respond. Williams and his crew took advantage of the opening, pushing forward, their guns blazing. They were making progress, slowly but surely, and Williams knew that they had to keep pushing, had to keep fighting. The war was not just about winning or losing, but about the human spirit, about the bonds we forge, about the connections we make, even in the midst of chaos and destruction. And with that thought, Williams charged forward, his gun firing, his heart pounding, his spirit unbroken. The outcome was far from certain, but one thing was clear: Williams and his crew would fight on, no matter what, their hearts unbroken, their spirits unwavering. As they pushed forward, the sounds of war grew louder, the smell of smoke and sweat hanging heavy in the air. Williams' senses were on high alert, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement, his ears tuned to the sound of gunfire, or the rumble of enemy tanks. The Japanese were everywhere, it seemed, their guns firing, their tanks rolling, their soldiers advancing. Williams was fighting for his life, for the lives of his crew, for the fate of the war. The battle was intense, the chaos, the noise, the smoke, all combining to create a sense of confusion, of disorientation. But Williams refused to give up, refused to yield. He was a soldier, a warrior, and this was his moment, his chance to make a difference. The fight was far from over, and Williams was ready, his heart pounding, his gun blazing, his spirit unbroken. As they pushed through the gap, Williams' crew encountered a maze of trenches and bunkers, each one heavily fortified and defended by determined Japanese soldiers. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and sweat, and the sound of gunfire echoed off the walls of the trenches. Williams knew they had to move quickly, to take out as many of the enemy positions as possible before the Japanese could regroup and counterattack. He spotted a bunker to their left, its machine gun firing wildly, cutting down any Allied soldier who dared to get too close. Williams pointed it out to his crew, and together they laid down a withering field of fire, trying to pin down the Japanese gunner. The bunker's walls were thick, but Williams knew that with enough firepower, they could blast their way inside. He yelled out to his crew, directing them to concentrate their fire on the bunker's entrance. The machine gun fell silent, and for a moment, Williams thought they had succeeded in taking out the position. But then, a hail of bullets ripped through the air, tearing into the dirt just inches from Williams' face. The Japanese gunner had merely been reloading, and now he was back, more determined than ever. Williams knew they had to act fast, or risk being cut down by the enemy's withering fire. He signaled to his crew, and together they made a desperate charge for the bunker, their guns firing, their hearts pounding. The Japanese gunner was waiting for them, his machine gun blazing, but Williams and his crew fought on, undaunted. They were a team, a well-oiled machine, working together to take down the enemy. Williams threw a grenade into the bunker, its explosion ripping through the air, taking out the machine gun and its gunner. The crew pushed forward, their guns still firing, their spirits unwavering. But as they emerged from the trenches, they were met with a sight that made Williams' blood run cold. A column of Japanese tanks was rolling towards them, their guns blazing, their treads tearing up the earth. Williams knew they had to act fast, or risk being overrun. He yelled out to his crew, directing them to fall back, to regroup and come up with a new plan. But it was too late, the tanks were too close, and Williams knew that their only hope was to stand and fight.